EJ and Craig, welcome to Tony Chat. How you guys doing today?
Good, thank you.
Very well, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for jumping on. I have heaps of questions for you guys, but first I want to know a little bit about you. Let's start with you, Craig. You're a cybersecurity professional. Give us a little bit of a rundown about yourself.
25 years in security. I've done nothing but in my professional career, spanning, back in the early days of the internet, working in the university that I went to. I moved on into full-blown crypto engineering, working for a PKI startup back in the day, and with always ahead for customers' problems. I've always been dealing with customers from the technical and sales perspectives. I've done enablement, training, marketing, everything to do with being a vendor in the cybersecurity space. I've worked with all your typical North American three-letter agencies through the years, but also the small end of town, being an advisor, a shaper, a guide, and most importantly, an evangelist for cybersecurity.
Fantastic. I love having someone like you on so I can ask all the hard questions and I don't have to do anything. So thank you for coming.
No worries. Thank you.
EJ, you're out there talking to people from a cyber law perspective. Give us a little rundown on yourself, my dude.
Okay, so I'll give you the less than 20-minute version. Good morning. I think context is nice. So I'm talking from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in Australia, and pay my respects to elders past and present. In Victoria right now, we are in our second week of our 6th lockdown. Context is important. I have spent 21 years of my adult life in the military in uniform as a uniformed legal officer, as we say in Australia, or JAG in America. 3 years actually in America in the United States Air Force on exchange as a JAG officer. It was while I was in the Air Force that I first started working for military cyber operations in the cyber squadron, and discovered that this was a niche area in amongst all the other law that you do in the military that I really enjoyed. So after I retired, it seemed a natural thing to then move that into private practice. And I think the thing that surprised me the most was that Australia wasn't really ready when I started in 2018 with a law firm that was only going to do cybersecurity. I wasn't going to do wills. I don't want to do family law. I know there's enough cybersecurity in the world. This is what I'm going to do. But I feel that Australia, we have this, I'm going to be quoting you, Craig, a kind of she'll be right attitude, which works in a lot of ways. Like if you're in a pickup truck in the middle of nowhere, there's no service station for 15,000 miles. Yeah, she'll be right is a good attitude to have. But if we're talking about cybersecurity on devices that our lives now depend on, it ain't so great. Anyway, what I have seen, and that's really encouraging, is in the last 12 to 18 months that Australia is really starting to wake up and notice the money being lost in ransomware and things like that, but also just generally wanting to understand what it means.
Fantastic. No, and that's the reason why I got you guys both on. You're out there talking to consumers and businesses from a legal perspective. Craig, you're talking from a compliance and technical perspective. Gives us a great understanding. So from my perspective, I love context, as you were saying a little bit earlier, EJ. So I always ask, okay, from a time perspective. So Craig, I'm going to start with you. What has been keeping you up late at night besides gaming with regards to cybersecurity first?
Gaming is certainly part of it for sure. Self-professed nerd, card carrying. I think part of it is what we do from the vendor that I work for is RSA. From the perspective of being on the front lines with customers, particularly during COVID. And certainly from the context that EJ provided, similarly across Australia, and I'm based in Brisbane. We've seen, one lockdown after another, and I believe that we will be in rolling lockdowns going further into the future, maybe a year, maybe two, who knows? But the idea is that, looking back over 2020, RSA provided some services to customers to enable that work from home and to do so securely. And what keeps me up at night, in the RSA side of things is knowing that hastily erected platforms that were designed to service a very urgent need may have just been left to gather dust as they may have been improperly implemented. I heard examples where they sent people home, didn't have enough VPN licenses for them to do that securely. And that's the idea, is that people were in a race to erect these things. So, and outside of RSA, from being a kind of a general security person who's interested in the topic, one thing that does keep me up at night is the idea of post-quantum cryptography. And that's one dimension that is coming up more and more these days as quantum computers start to increase their power and, become a legit force out there. There's a future state where quantum computers will rubbish traditional standard cryptography. And as a background as a cryptographer, that's one aspect. Delivering post-quantum cryptography is a top of mind aspect for me.
It's quite interesting. You just blew my mind as soon as you use the word quantum, because I love the Marvel character.
You lose people very quickly in that conversation, but anyway.
So one of the things I'll touch on a bit later is it's amazing how the good guys will do something like machine learning to beat the bad guys, and then the bad guys go, I'll use some of that as well.
It's an arms race.
Right, and then it's AI, and then they'll use AI, and now we're talking about quantum. Like, the good guys will eventually get to this point, but the bad guys have access to the same technology as well. So how do we sort of circumvent that? And
well, yeah, we could spend hours on this topic, but it is an arms race. Yeah.
And we shall. EJ, what keeps you up at night, my dear, besides your two lovely kids?
I'm just going to jump in on that one, Craig, because I find that really interesting as well. And I think explainable AI, while it won't answer all the specifics of crypto via quantum, I think if we start to see security as a building process, and that we build it, everything is done with security in mind when we're building. So when we're building the machines that are going to be delivering and performing quantum computing and algorithms which are going to exceed what I can even conceive right now, the only way I think that then we can understand, equip ourselves, and prevent RoboCop 18 really comes with explainable AI. So it's the algorithm itself needs to dumb it down so that we can understand where it went. And I understand with everything, having any kind of explainability also creates a vulnerability. But that's one of those things I do think about as well. And I also get really, what's the word? when you get that rash, like young people don't get chicken pox anymore, but like a kind of, itchy rash all over, like an urticaria, is this blockchain stuff. And, people thinking that they can just sprinkle this word into any conversation. It's like, oh, it's great, it's blockchain. And really, and I'm not a privacy law specialist, I am a cybersecurity specialist. I just see blockchain as like, in 18 months, it's public data. It's public. And very hard for it to be destroyed and diminished and erased, which is great, and decomposed. So I get blockchain security, wonderful for storage and maintaining the data or the data, but I don't feel at ease about its actual security from a cyber perspective, and its availability to more than just the owner doesn't make me feel good. So it's not keeping me awake at night. It's something I ponder.
I think 18 months ago it was part of buzzword bingo, and if you put blockchain in front of your startup to attract investors, you're higher likely to get that investment. And then similarly for quantum too, you put quantum into your name these days, and it's going to get people's attention because it's starting to have that kind of groundswell of interest out there.
That's right, like a plant-based meat. In fact, I'm actually thinking, if you guys want to join me in this, I'm thinking of a little startup that's going to make a plant-based blockchain food. So I'm pretty sure I'd already have investors by 3 p.m.
You're saying to me, EJ, so this blockchain keeps you up plus plant-based stuff. As I said, context is important and time frames. So, Craig, you talked a little bit about lockdown 1.0. EJ, 18 months ago, what was the main things you were considering regarding cybersecurity before the lockdown? Because I know everyone talks about the lockdown, we will touch on that, but what were you thinking about back then? Was it about consumer law and how cybersecurity dealt with that? Give us a bit of a picture of how that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I think 18 months ago, I was more in the litigation space. So I was dealing with the aftermath. I'm not an ambulance chaser. I promised people would come to me of their own volition, but they'd come to me after a breach and where there was a clear case of negligence. So there'd been some kind of forensic examination and another party was clearly at fault. And hadn't taken reasonable steps to ensure the safety of their data and therefore the related money, property, whatever it was, and running cases like that through all kinds of jurisdictions, you know, Supreme, Federal Court, whatever, and discovering I'm really, you know, I'm more useful in a prevention space. It's really a very depressing space to be in the post-breach world. You know, you want to have a box of tissues. I think, you know, if anyone's had a burglary in their own home, they're going to have some sense of that sheer vulnerability and the shock that you're working with clients who've been in that space, like a mom and pop business who, you know, like, for example, I think it was back in 2018 or early 2019, a building construction, you know, company. It was family owned, and the irony was they were so particular about their security. So they actually had a siloed machine at home. I mean, I love this woman was, you know, in her 60s. She'd been doing this before the internet was a thing for the construction business that they ran, and she had a siloed computer that was just to deal with invoicing, and then another one that was just to deal with the emails in and out and, you know, social media. It was just beautiful. So the shock when they were in my office that this had happened to them, and it actually happened, I won't name names, but it happened through a website developer, and they'd rung the support desk for them, and they had actually given them the phone number of a criminal. The help desk had given them, and I don't know that the help desk realized it themselves. So, and then it's just rewinding. How can I put these people back in the position they were in when these were already what I would call woke, you know, kind of in the older demographic, not ones that I maybe expect to be so woke. They were woke. They were already so aware of what was happening to small businesses and larger businesses, of course, at that time. And the attack was direct on the phone with the person to the bank account. You know, they'd owned the device willingly. You know, they'd got a remote assistance in, and emptied the bank account in front of
that strikes a chord, you know, from my professional background around what RSA does. Is one component of it is authenticating people, making sure they are who they say they are. And you can put, and I said this in various panels that I participated in through the last couple of years, is you can spend as much money as you want. You can buy the latest, greatest kit. You can have the most proper procedures, everything from what you described as an air gap network to protect, you know, your crown jewels. You could do everything. And at the end of the day, the last perimeter is your people. Yeah. And it is almost trivial. You could Google this and get the phone book back. You can watch videos on YouTube of actual real life social engineering. Yeah. That can get around any kind of high-tech perimeter that you put, and you know, from the perspective of another component of RSA's business is, you know, threat defense and threat detection, and kind of reducing the amount of time that a potential hacker has in your network or your life. And from that perspective, they espouse the philosophy as always assume a state of compromise. And so in the prevention conversation, and with social engineering as a backdrop, assuming a state of compromise is kind of claiming, you know, you've lost the battle. before you even begin to fight it.
Mm.
The idea is a lot of philosophies have come into the fore more recently around not necessarily opening up the gates and calling it a day and saying, yeah, the hackers have won, but the philosophies of zero trust and authenticating everybody, siloing everything, and then doing real-time verification of access entitlements at any time. And that's a zero trust model that is nothing new in cybersecurity. It's been around since the 70s. But zero trust is definitely a philosophy, not necessarily a product, that you can attach to your means and methods. And it sounds to me, from your example, EJ, is that your small business owner, the construction people, the lady in charge, was actually implementing zero trust without even knowing it was called zero trust, by air gapping the crown jewels, which is a good thing. And hopefully if they added a little bit more, had a little bit more advice from an actual cyber professional, they might have been able to up the ante and combat that social engineering aspect, maybe elevate the security posture of that siloed device, and they'd be clicking along without nary a problem or a violation, as you described it.
I mean, if I can just have a little bit of artistic license here, Tony.
Go ahead.
One of the issues in Australia, one of the white elephants in our room here down under, is racism. And you're going to go, how is she going to weave this back into this social engineering? And I'm going to tell you how. Because, in the 1970s, if they rang telecom, as Telstra was then known, they got an Australian voice. And that was an instant level of trust, because at the end of the day, every part of every business relationship, and I don't care if we're talking mega corporations or mum and pop shops, is trust. And we're talking about individuals. So when this woman was given a number to dial from the website creator that she trusted, and she rang that number, and the person sounded just like a Telstra Aussie person. So not one of the millions of overseas workers who we rely on in Australia, out of Australia, or first generation Australians who are just as Australian, more true blue than I am. But this is the thing with social engineering. It plays on your weaknesses. Beautiful social engineers who sound like me, we're already in your path. Okay, so then she's speaking to this person who sounds Australian. He asks all the right questions. He's very reassuring. She says, before she sees him empty the account, she says, but how will I know you're just doing this to check if I've been compromised? So she's even asking questions, like it's even as it's happening before her eyes. And he says, oh, well, don't worry. I'll send you an invoice and a receipt. So he sends her a receipt, and I will say that the company she believed she was dealing with was Google. And the next second, erupting out of her dot matrix printer, bless her heart, is a Google letterhead. And I mean, a 5-year-old these days could do a better imitation, but it just says here is the receipt for these monies we've transferred. So the husband and wife had turned up in my office after coming down to the Google headquarters in Melbourne City to see why they weren't answering phone calls to remedy. Where can you give us this money back? Because here's the receipt. The level of beautiful naivety and trust that happened in this story it's so heart-rendering and so relatable.
As I mentioned, you could go into YouTube and search on social engineering or phishing or vishing, voice phishing, and get a whole bunch of actual examples of this occurring. And it reminds me of two things, around humans are the real perimeter, right? in the concept of social engineering. And two things strike me is one is a meme that I saw just a few weeks ago, where the meme expressed that Rick Astley's "Never Gonna Give You Up" song is responsible for more cybersecurity awareness away from risky clicks than all cybersecurity training combined. Which is a great meme because, and even Rick Astley himself came out a couple of weeks ago to thank the internet for giving him 1 trillion views for Never Gonna Give You Up. The second part around social engineering, I mean, as you saw, there's all sorts of examples, but even physical, real life social engineering happens and always happens. People can be very gregarious and trick you into all sorts of things. And some of these tactics are very, very clever, and especially during COVID, where you had sites imitating the World Health Organization and the apps they were producing, and fake malware-laden apps providing actual real COVID data that had value. And one of the drawing back to the physical aspect, maybe not so much these days, but certainly always going to be part of the backdrop, is you can get anywhere inside a building. The old adage, you can get anywhere if you're wearing a hard hat and carrying a clipboard. Or I've seen one actual example of somebody getting into a concert with a ladder. All they had was a ladder, and they were carrying this ladder into a busy concert. And then the latest one that I heard is you could get anywhere if you're carrying a pizza. And so now, relating that back into the digital world, who's carrying the pizzas into your organization that people are just going to let through? And there's always somebody.